Hi, I'm Peppermint, and I'm on the tightrope.
We are witnessing America as a failed social experiment.
How do we tell this story in a way that builds the kind of emotional momentum that colorblind ideology builds?
So many young brothers and sisters of the younger generation find themselves so far removed from the best of their past.
What are we going to make out of the nothing we've been given? How do you envision possibility?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the tightrope. This is where we engage in tough dialogues and try to keep our balance on even tougher issues. I am here with my co-host and dear friend, Dr. Cornel West. Cornel, how are you feeling?
Oh, I'll tell you, I'm fortified.
You're fortified, huh?
That's it. Indeed, indeed, indeed. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. I feel like I'm just beginning to recover from that whole election, energy. It finally feels like it's a little bit behind me. I think I have a little bit of trepidation. I feel like there's potentially some nefarious things around the corner in the political arena that we're not yet being made privy to. What are you feeling? I mean, do you have any kind of sense about how that might be going on?
Well, I mean, the neo-fascism is still rather intense in terms of undercutting the election, already trying to illegitimize the election. But the challenge is going to be once Trump is finally pushed back, exactly what Brother Biden and Sister Harris are going to do.
Right.
Are they going to fall right back into Wall Street greed, right back into Pentagon militarism, right back into playing lip service to this mass incarceration system, which is a crime against humanity? Are they going to play lip service, to poor people and Black people and transgender and gays and lesbians and so forth? We're going to see. We're going to keep pressure on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I worry that what I started calling white supremacy light is often worse than the whole full blown, sort of density of white supremacy, because it allows you to get caught up in the very situations you're talking about, where things get paid lip service, and so there's a sense of relief. I mean, the kind of mobilization that Trump encouraged, right, just by being such a horrible individual, right, just by that, got all this energy, counter energy challenging him. But what's going to happen now is really a question. How will we keep the momentum going?
Absolutely, because it was, again, primarily Black votes that ensured that America didn't go fascist.
I know. It's like Baldwin always said, basically keep people away from their worst selves. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other thing that is interesting to think about is that, we're actually relitigating women's reproductive freedoms and rights all over again. And, you would have thought that something like that would have maybe not died down, but not been at the heart of this kind of a mobilization. Right. And, I think this is really interesting when you put it in the context of so much more visibility for trans people and for, queer, non-binary people in general, because of the way that it tries to sort of force biology to be determinism, right? That it wants to sort of say, you have this reproductive capacity, we're going to make you have to deal with it in its full consequences whenever nature decides. It's kind of returning us to a fixity that much of the culture and much of the political social experiences have really pushed open. It said, this isn't, biology is not destiny. And yet here we are literally litigating this all over again.
No, it's true. It's very true. And in some ways, it's part of the spiritual decadence and moral decrepitude of the empire, that if you can't extend your deep love to precious trans folk, if you can't extend your deep love to gay brothers and lesbian sisters, then what kind of love do you really have? Now, this has been always a problem for Black people, right? They couldn't extend the love to Black people, so it was clear that they had a white supremacist regime in place. And the white supremacist regime is a gangster regime when it comes to Black people, when it comes to people of color. And so given the gangsterization of the country as a whole, people now are priding themselves on, viciously attacking and having contempt and having hatred for the vulnerable and the weak, whatever form that takes, you see.
Right.
And that's the thing that we've always had to highlight, spotlight, fight against, push back, and as you say, end up accenting the best of the country. We become, in many ways, the rescuers and the saviors of the country, even though we're the first ones crucified.
I mean, so true. We save we save people from themselves, and then they want to yell at you for saving themselves. Why are you trying to save me from myself? Get out of here.
Who you
Makes
think
no
you
sense.
are? Yeah,
Exactly. Well, today we have a guest who, I'm really excited to talk to with you because it really speaks to what we're talking about now, which is the degree to which we need to be profoundly more open and engaging with people's multiplicity of gender expressions in ways that would get to this capacity to respect, honor, and politically fight for those who are in vulnerable communities, which was how you put it a moment ago. So I'm really happy to welcome Peppermint to the show today. Hey, Peppermint, you're here.
Hello. Hi.
We're so happy that you're here with us.
Thank you for having me on the tightrope. It's been a while since I've walked on a tightrope, but I feel good.
Yeah, it's kind of scary up here.
We've been breakdancing on this tightrope, but we're glad to have you breakdance with us now. We just
all right, watch out.
Yeah, so Cornel and I, as you may have heard, we were just talking about, just the sort of return to this kind of reproductive biological destiny, right, that the Supreme Court is attempting to force everyone into. And I started thinking about it in the context of there being so much more open space. I mean, for the expression and political discussion of, queer, transgender, and other non-binary gender expressions. What do you think about this moment? Do you notice that tension, the kind of drive to turn people back? I mean, I know you're both a performer, a political activist. You came in, I think you were runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race, and you're just people adore you, as they should. I've watched your work; it's fantastic. What do you think about this tension? Do you feel it in your community? Do you feel it in the drag community that there's an effort to kind of crush people back into kind of biological categories?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much in the drag category or in the drag community. That is generally a very open-minded and, in my experience, liberal community. But I certainly have felt that unusual, like it feels like a beaming back to the 20, 30, 40 years, even 50 years prior, with regard to an attempt at people's rights and trying to frame the conversation in a place that really, it is an unusual conversation. It is harder to have a dialogue about biology. Everyone doesn't necessarily consider themselves a science scholar, but I think at face value, it's just an easy cop-out. It's an easy cop-out when we're specifically talking about using people's biology as a reason to restrict what they can do in this country or in any country that's a democracy, hopefully, continually. It really is, I believe, a cop-out where people can just kind of intimidate the people that they're having the conversation with into not responding. Only because if we use this same framework of biology being fixed, the only tools that most people, at least the only tools that the people that I've met can use are the ones that we learned in school that we didn't take much interest in anyway, and that we didn't really get good grades anyway. And so it's really just like almost an elementary school level grasping of these concepts of biology and sex.
Right.
We're not talking about, scientists who are actually scholars in their scientific fields or in medicine using these as reasons to restrict the rights of individuals. Because from what I've heard, and we're getting ready to do an event called Black Queer Town Hall, and it's a STEM, it's a queer Black science conference that we're holding in the new year. From what I've heard from people who are science scholars, although there are certainly there's nothing fixed really in the world of sex and gender in science, and that there's always another option. There are other things happening. People argue that there's just two sexes. There are people who are intersexed, and there are people who, have, people who don't fit into every single box. And I'm not going to try to explain science, but that certainly, I don't believe, should be a reason why, when we're talking about the everyday lived experiences of people, let's talk about what's happening on a socioeconomic level. Let's talk about what's happening in terms of policies that actually affect the everyday experience of people. And when you talk about this sort of new wave of people trying to use these reasons, trying to reason us out of things, I think one thing that's really sad is that when we talk about limiting, specifically from the conversation around transgender individuals and trans bodies, when we talk about using science or any reason to limit, let's say, for example, womanhood and trans womanhood, and draw a very close distinction, and then try to talk about reasons why trans women don't fit into, some people say trans women don't fit into the definition of being a woman. And then those reasons, unfortunately, can almost always be used against other women who aren't trans, cisgender women who aren't trans. If you talk about biology, you're talking about body type, size, height, depth of voice, hands, chromosomes. There are lots of cisgender women or women who are not trans who fit into a category that isn't as Black and white, let's say, or isn't as binary as that. And so, when we were fighting really hard, and we did have one victory, in force it was 2019, not 2020, where we were hearing the cases or going to the Supreme Court while they were hearing the arguments to challenge Title VII, which is workplace discrimination protections for everyone. A lot of the reasons that there were arguments that the proponents of striking down Title VII were using were things that could be used against any woman or any man. Examples, why trans people, should not be protected because, religion should trump their protection on the workplace, and any woman who doesn't act and look and conduct herself how women should not be, my mom fits into that category. And so,
that's very common. Yeah, that's right. Go ahead, Cornel. I'm sorry.
Sister Angela Davis always says justice is indivisible. So that we're so tied together, we're dependent on each other. And she's so right about that. You start targeting one group, and the next thing you know, they're going to be on their way to some of your other friends' house. And they may in the end show up at your house with the same argument you used against them in that way. And this is true for race, gender, sexual orientation, binary, non-binary, class, empire, and so forth. But as indispensable as science is, though, science can never bestow on any of us, binary, non-binary, whatever, the sanctity and dignity that we have. You see, that's a question of morality. That's a question of spirituality. And by morality, all I mean is integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity to others. And by spirituality, all I mean is using your empathy and imagination to conceive of a different world, better than the one we live in. And it can have religious stories, secular stories, whatever. But what is it? Because you coming out of Wilmington, Delaware, is that right?
Oh, you better believe it. We got a lot of attention this year.
You one of the historic exemplars. You one of the grand ones. I'm thinking of Clifford Brown blowing his horn. I'm thinking of Bob Marley playing his guitar, spending his time in Wilmington, and now our dear sister Peppermint, how do you conceive of yourself in terms of sustaining your rich spirituality and morality, given all the mess you've had to come to terms with in your life?
You know, I ask myself that every morning. I would say that, you know, a lot of, and I don't know if this is, I don't know if it's considered a weakness from other people. I consider it a strength, but my sense of connection, and I believe I have a very strong sense of connection and empathy with just others around me, other people, even, you know, even other beings, animals, whatever, you know, folks and folks we share this planet with. And so I often operate in that world and through that lens. And so in that regard, it's very easy for me to remain in touch with my gratitude. It's very easy for me to remain in touch with, again, a sense of empathy and seeing what's happening around me and focusing on whatever I can do, or focusing my energy to helping others and trying to communicate in a way that is effective for everyone to gain a higher level understanding. And so that alone really occupies and helps me occupy that space of spirituality and connection that you spoke about. It's not so much a dedication to a type of spirituality on its own. It's really the work that I do to remain connected with other people. And I know that the spirituality can be defined as something other than just being connected to other humans, maybe, I don't know. But that's my connection to spirituality is more of in my conscience, you know, how we connect with each other. And I do think that, you know, I do believe in a energy in the afterlife. And I think that there's some karma. I do believe in karma.
Well, some people are in trouble then. There's a lot of trouble on the horizon then for some people.
Oh, Lord. Now, are there towering examples in your own life and lived experience that you fall back on in family and history that constitute wind at your back?
Well, I mean, are you talking about individuals?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my grandmother, Mary Yancey. It might be sound a little kind of trite to say.
And say her name again.
Her name is Mary Yancey, Mary Johnson Yancey, and she was, you know, for my whole life, she was my grandmother. We called her Gaga. Before there was Lady Gaga, we called her Gaga. And
the first Gaga. The
first Gaga, that's right.
But this is the first one.
And she was a great teacher and mentor to me. And, you know, she was very human. She showed me what it means to be a human who strives towards greatness, but has very visible flaws that as humans do.
That's right. All of us.
And so I learned a lot of that greatness from her. And then I was able to, as an adult, go back and discover things about her that I never knew. I didn't know that she was credited as starting the Harrisburg race riots of 1969. She was an educator. She worked with the Board of Elections. And, you know, I knew bits and pieces of this stuff, but I just didn't know. And so I always have an opportunity to go back and learn from her whenever I want to indulge. And then in my personal circle, I would be just so remiss if I didn't mention my sister and mentor, a very good friend, Laverne Cox, who is just a beacon and also speaks very highly of you, Dr. West.
Send my love and respect.
I sure will.
Send my love and respect, Sister Laverne, absolutely.
So Peppermint, that's amazing what your grandma Gaga was credited with. And I want to ask, do you think that some of your own political vision, aspirations, as well as activism comes from her spirit, or perhaps her influence over time? Was she politically active in ways that you recall? And how does she influence the kinds of activities that you've been involved in?
No, she was never political in the house. I didn't know much.
Wow.
I never even had a chance to she didn't expose me to any of that. Maybe I just wasn't checking for it because I was often, watching cartoons or in the basement or whatever I was doing. And so I didn't get a chance to see any of her work in the political world. I didn't even hear her speaking about it. My mom tells me stories of being of accompanying my grandmother, her mother, to the polls when she was a poll worker, and my mom would just probably sit in the corner and color or something, and then that inspired my mom to be a poll worker. To this day, she just worked at the polls in the 2020 election.
Mm.
And I was like, Mom, maybe this is the year to sit it out because of the pandemic and there's so much going on. And she's a woman of color and she's older, and I said, Mom, maybe. And she was like, no, I'm dedicated to this. And then she invoked my grandmother. And so there obviously is a very strong connection there.
Mm.
But so maybe that's where it comes from, because otherwise I can't explain it.
Right. Now, so talk a bit about your activism. Tell us and tell our tightrope community, more about what your activism has been about most primarily, and just share what you've been experiencing this year in terms of that.
Happily, thank you. Well, I think my quote activism really started with in my mind, it's really just a deep concern with what's going on around me and in my environment, how it not only affects me, but affects those around, others. And, I guess it started, I remember seeing images in the 90s, growing up as a little trans girl in the 90s, watching TV and hearing all of the artists and entertainers, everyone talking about the AIDS epidemic. And it was, as a kid, there was a lot that I obviously didn't understand, but being able to experience so many moments, so many deep moments, so many poignant moments, so many sad moments, just, in my world, in the world around me, just watching through film and television. I didn't know anyone who that I knew was personally affected by AIDS and HIV at that time. But but so many things were themed with this concern and with this sort of sorrow. One of the most effective things I think that personally affected me was the loss of Pedro Zamora, who was an AIDS activist, who was a housemate on the third season of The Real World on MTV. And I was probably, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know. Let's not talk about age, but I was of whatever age.
You were just barely born, Peppermint.
I was just a youngin', and somehow I was able to watch this show, and and I was just moved to tears after learning that he had died and seeing the tributes to him. And he actually, I think he passed. The anniversary of his death was very recently, like a week ago or something. And so that affected me for years to come. And so later, many years later, when I started working in the drag world in New York City, in the clubs and the bars, I had many opportunities to engage in I don't even know if I would call it activism, but really helping bring my community, folks in who were basically my audience members, inform them of what was happening and developing on the front of AIDS and HIV education and prevention. I remember talking to someone, it's years ago now, so it doesn't matter. Lots of stuff was happening that shouldn't have been gone down in the bars and clubs in the 90s in New York. But I remember late, like 1999 or so, someone came up to me. He had been a regular at my show, and he was really sweetheart. I consider us friendly. We were acquaintances. And he was very upset that day and mentioned to me, he disclosed to me that he had recently tested positive for HIV. And, you know, it was very touching, and I was moved. And I was also, you know, honestly, a little sort of confused or baffled why there had been so much AIDS and HIV education and sort of fear beaten into people in my generation, and it somehow skipped his generation. He was 19 years old. He was 19.
Wow.
And too young to be in the bar, but maybe he had a fake ID, I don't know. But either way, he was a young person in our community. And that really bothered me and I don't presume to know what his education level was about AIDS and HIV, but it just prompted me to help turn the page and understand what was next. And so I volunteered for over 10 years with the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. And that was really my first foray in the world of activism. And then obviously being queer, self-identifying as queer my entire life. Later on, when I was able to kind of articulate that in a better way as being trans, it was apparent to me that we had a long way to go. And then, you know, the intersection that I live at, you know, trans and Black and female, there's never a loss of an opportunity. There's always an opportunity to fight for our rights because they're always under attack.
Yes.
Oh, that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that people could not in any way doubt that you have such a wonderful combination of intellect and eloquence on the one hand, and this wonderful style and spirit on the other. That's why I started off raising the question about spirit, like, where does Sister Peppermint come from? Who shaped her? How she end up being this person who could be in the world and yet at the same time be able to preserve your own sense of dignity and style and so forth. But as an artist, I want to ask that same question. How do you situate yourself as an artist in the studio with those letters to a lover and so forth? How do you situate yourself as an artist now in the rich tradition of queer in general, transgender in particular, as you lift your voice, the anthem of Black people?
I have, as an artist, as a drag entertainer, as a singer and performer, and sometimes those things are all combined. Sometimes I focus more on one or the other. I have had moments to really kind of, you know, just focus on the fun aspect of it. I've done musically speaking, I've had several albums before. One was talking about put $1 in my titty. One was talking about you don't call me on your shady phone. And all those things are very real, but
you keeping it real. You keeping it real now. You keeping it real.
But you know, I guess I was I had the opportunity, and I really want to just gush a little bit on you, Dr. West, just for 1 second, because your quote, "Justice is what love looks like in public," really resonated with me when I, after several quote relationships that I've had in the past, each time the relationships have gotten better. Maybe that's because I'm becoming better. I don't know if it's the world is becoming better, but what have you. I was in a relationship recently where it was just the best relationship I've ever had. My partner was so willing to just show his love for me in public and not have any type of conditions on that. And I think that's obviously something that all humans want. It is definitely something that's fleeting for trans individuals, especially trans women, and definitely trans women of color. We know that the rate of, I think there's now 35 on the record trans women or transgender people who've been murdered in this country in 2020. It's the deadliest year on record for trans people. And I only mention it because today is Transgender Day of Remembrance. And, many of those murders are committed at the hands of our partners, intimate partners, our lovers, our boyfriends, the people who we're having, even casual romantic encounters with. And so it wasn't lost on me at all that I was in this relationship that was the opposite of that. And I didn't feel in danger. In fact, I felt very safe and loved. And so I needed to write about that. And I knew that the next whatever I was going to put out, song, music, project, was going to include speaking about that, because here I am enjoying this moment and so many others are not. And again, that really resonates with me. And so I want to try to show other people, trans people, this is what's possible. You are worthy of being loved and worthy of being shown love. And and I also want to show people who are not trans, look at who we can be and look at what you can have with us. It's okay and it is safe to love and care for us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's super
Absolutely.
powerful. As as a woman, as an activist, what would you say we can do to most make that case that you so eloquently just made? In other words, when you think about rights for voting, you figure you pass some laws, right? It seems like there's a direct link between the problem and the solution, right? But when you're talking about being seen in your fullness, being appreciated, being respected, being cared for in the way you describe, and what has to be overcome in terms of, heteropatriarchal, cisgender demands, right, on people's
Capitalist.
minds, right? How do you break that mold enough for it to be seen?
I think it is Tricia, I don't know. Like the truth is, I don't really know.
Yeah, no, I know. It would have been
If it was-
amazing if you did.
If it was an easy answer, I think we'd have gotten there by now. But I do believe you are right that obviously policies and legislation and rules of the House should be reflective of I believe should be reflective of those thoughts and a lot of those issues but there is also the practical seeing people in your everyday life who have these experiences is no doubt going to be helpful. When we think back to like people were marching against segregation, and they were like upset at the laws that were being passed in their states, and they hadn't yet even gone to school with a Black child, and they were so worked up about that. I think later on, and certainly there's still plenty of problems with the school systems, but I think when you talk to maybe some people a generation ago about what their experience was watching our country go from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s with regards to race relations, I think a lot of people's first example would probably be people they knew in school, people they knew around them, people they personally knew, not citing a law. And so I think that's what we need. And we learned from GLAAD that apparently 80% of people in the United States say that they don't know and have never met a transgender person. And that's a lot of the country, especially when you consider that more people say that they've seen a ghost in this country than a transgender person.
Oh, Lord,
we have some work to do. We have some work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's scary right there.
Wow, that's a powerful way of putting it. I never thought of it.
Yeah,
like that.
I never even heard that one. I'm gonna quote you, Peppermint.
Yes, please.
Lord, but we do want to say
yeah.
on this day of remembrance, Trans Day of Remembrance, that those 33 murders against our precious trans folk are crimes against humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be very clear and loud about that. because it's so often rendered so invisible, pushed aside, pushed to the margins and the fringes in that regard. You see, we can't really walk around as if we are human beings with integrity and honesty and morality and spirituality and not acknowledge that's a crime against humanity. Just like when the police shoot our precious young Black folk or brown or whatever, that's crime. Those are crimes against humanity. Drones dropped on innocent folk in Yemen, those are crimes against. So it is for the 35 that we've lost already this year. We still got another month and a half, right?
Yeah.
Good
And you know,
God Almighty.
this connection goes to the point that you were both making about the, you know, the ways in which we're bound up in the same circumstance, where they're knocking on one man's door, then they end up on somebody else's door the next day and the next one, because you know, this year has been a year of, you know, supported expression of hate, right? That there's been encouragement to express hate against who? Vulnerable people, Black people, young people, trans people, immigrants, right, who don't speak English, who are, you know, coming across the border, so on and so forth, Muslims. You know, this is, you know, it's been a real sort of a celebration of this kind of hate. So it really is true. Then eventually they're coming to your door. And I think this is going to be I think trans activism has the capacity to basically be illuminating about this matter, you know, to think of that, of the community as helping illuminate everybody's vulnerability, right?
You know, Professor Rose, you nailed that. I think also what you just said connected with something that Dr. Angela Davis had said recently in a video. I will paraphrase greatly because I don't remember it exactly, but that it's, you know, we already know, she said that transgender individuals, queer folks, but particularly transgender individuals, are showing us a way to have a better understanding about not only gender and sex and sexuality, but also who we are as humans. And that was extremely paraphrased. But I think that kind of what you just said kind of resonates with me on that same level, is that, you know, people think of trans people and queer people and oftentimes people of color as like these other like renegades or people who are, you know, everything but just humans who have a different understanding maybe of the way that you, of different understanding of things other than the way that you may do it or that person may do it. But how we are all connected is so, I think it's just so crucial to see that no one wants to be put in a box. No one wants to be withheld. No one wants to be micromanaged or over, you know, regulated. And the only way to break free from like any type of imprisonment really is having a greater understanding of who we are, our bodies, ourselves, our minds, our spirituality, each other. And I think, and it's true that trans people and queer people and people in the queer community and every marginalized community has something to teach the rest of the world. Right. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, when you look at just the history of humankind, and in the end, it's really about how do we learn how to see things given our blind spots and feel more deeply given our indifference and act more courageously given our proclivity toward conformity. And so trans folk, y'all see things that, you know, we straight folk just don't see, because you're dealing with forms of marginality that you can see things through your lens as human beings, articulated, expressed, that folk don't see. Just like Black folk can see things a lot of white brothers and sisters can't see. And the question becomes, how do we lift those voices back to the anthem of Black folk now? When you say lift every voice, you didn't say just lift straight voices. You didn't say just lift Black bourgeois voices. You didn't say just lift Black voices in Connecticut as opposed to Mississippi. No. Lift all the voices, trans voices across the board. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
That's the fundamental thing. Then my Bible tells me the least of these, the most vulnerable. Now, who are the most vulnerable? What you do unto them, you do unto me.
Mhm.
That's what Jesus is talking about. Now, see, most of the pastors ain't got that memo. Don't get me wrong. The churches ain't got that memo for the most part. But that deep love overcoming through overloving, that's what it's about. That's what your grandma understood. You see, that's what Tricia is asking her whole life. And in that way, you can't help but have a smile, even given all of the grimness and all of the ugliness in the world, you see.
You know, Peppermint, this dovetails with what I wanted to ask you. So I know we don't have a ton of time with you left. So I want to make sure I get it in, because what Cornel just said about, just your ability to be sort of, a loving witness, right, to difficult situations. I was really impressed and moved by your grace around the way that conflict around who would be considered eligible for RuPaul's Drag Race and who wouldn't, based on their gender expression, basically. And so, it really blew my mind as an issue, because I was like, wait, so y'all are policing that boundary? I was like, hold on. But just to recap, let me recap for people who may not be aware, and correct me, Peppermint, as soon as I get it wrong, which I'm want to do every once in a while. But basically, the notion was that, drag queens could technically, according to some, should only be male gendered individuals, queer men performing as females, and that trans women were there not starting out as men, and therefore they're basically they start out too female to perform female. I mean, am I getting the debate proper in terms of what the argument was?
I would say that I don't think I've ever heard anyone even put it that graciously, to be honest with you. But yeah, there've been many arguments that were over the past several years centered around RuPaul's Drag Race. Many of them involved quotes from people involved with the show, basically saying that on the show they weren't going to allow women, certainly not women, and definitely not trans women, to compete. Trans women who had any surgeries, like that's basically, and so I guess the most recent refinement of that was you can be on the show if you're trans as long as you haven't had any surgeries, and I think that's problematic for two ways. I think that's problematic because my name was invoked in one of those interviews, and my body was spoken about, whether I had this surgery or that surgery, whether I'm a woman or not, whether I just think I'm a woman because I haven't had a surgery or this. And my feelings were hurt, and I did have an opportunity to talk about it. The public really chimed in. I think that the general public and the audience of television in general is a different audience than it was 10 years ago, when you could get away with saying things like this. And so there was a certain level of accountability that just swooped itself, and the problem self-corrected itself.
Right.
I'll say that. But at least in terms of its speaking points. But and whatever happens on the show from here on out, we have yet to see. My fingers are crossed. I think that all shows should be more inclusive. I mean, what country are we in? And
well, that's a question. That's unfortunately a legit
that's
question.
the T-shirt of 2020. But I do want to say, kind of harkening back to what we were talking about before, is that when we start, categorizing and qualifying trans bodies based on the surgeries that they've had, then what we're saying about womanhood is that it is just boiled down to your body and what type of body. And those decisions are made, that in that case, that those decisions are being made by everyone except for the individual, by everyone except for the woman involved. Right. And that's not the situation that any woman wants to be in.
Right. No, without a doubt. And, it occurred to me that in that case, and I'm not talking here about RuPaul, I'm saying more generally, if there's a rule about the boundaries of performing in drag, then basically it's policing the gendered boundaries of the performance, which, the whole point was a critique of that, right? So it shows
Exactly.
you that anybody can begin to erect these boundaries and to police them and to create exclusions, no matter where they have originated in a hierarchical system of power. But I listened to an interview of you, and I thought you gave a fantastic description of drag. That someone asked you, we need a new definition because of this conflict that emerged, and you said drag is the heightened gender experience for the sake of performance. And I thought that was very powerful and enabling in a way that I think depolarizes the conversation and some of the ways in which you were being positioned. But again, I thought you were very graceful about it. Thought you had grounds to be quite snippy.
So I've heard from people, and I will, I mean, what I was saying online might have been different than what I would have been saying if you were over at my house.
Well, but that's what that line is for. There's supposed to be a line between what you say in your house and what you say on the doggone internet. So I think
That's the truth.
that's the truth.
Lord, Lord, Lord. But remember what August Wilson says about Black performance. He said it always authorizes a alternative reality, richer, more joyful, more loving, more visionary, for empowerment of others. Now, see, that's the son of the chocolate side of Pittsburgh. August Wilson.
All right, PA, coming through again.
Without a doubt.
You think about your performances. Just like James Brown, you putting everything in those performances, all your heart, mind, soul, what's inside of you, you giving to the audience, and they walk away more empowered,
more enriched, and more empowered.
More enriched. Absolutely.
I agree. Right. That's certainly the aim, and my goal is to, affect, folks, and hopefully give them a taste of joy and enjoyment, obviously through whatever I can do on stage or as a performer. But I do believe that the performances, whether it's a live performance or even film and television, the works of art, the books, whatever that we read or that we indulge in, all of those things that we take in, I think we want to be moved. We want to see a movie or hear a story that's going to change our perspective, our lives. And when you see performers, Black folks and queer folks, often in one and the same, because I don't necessarily, it is important for me every now and again to remind myself out loud that, there's not a separation between Black and queer, that those things are very intertwined.
That's right.
And so, but when we see those, when we hear those stories that we don't always hear, then there's no other option if we're really listening, other than to be profoundly moved and affected and more enriched. And that's why we did an event this summer called the Black Queer Town Hall, which after so many days and months in the quarantine and pandemic of seeing our Black brothers be needlessly murdered at the hands of our police on video in front of our faces, inescapable. We're just in our apartments waiting out the pandemic earlier in the year. And seeing all these videos and seeing all these stories, I was not prepared to see. I never wanted, there's never had been a moment in my life, other than maybe watching a scary movie, that I ever wanted to see a person be murdered on camera. And, not that should hold any more weight than just hearing a story about it, but it was in such a raw way that myself and Bob the drag queen were so moved and distraught, and pretty much every feeling, as everybody was, and many Black people were. we were so sick of seeing ourselves being slaughtered on TV and on our phones and on social media over and over again. And it was like this abuse. And so we really wanted to have a moment to celebrate Black queer joy, see these entertainers, hear these people speak, have panels and discussions. And so we held the first annual Black Queer Town Hall, which was basically an event that had all those things, performances and panels. We had lots of really distinguished guests. We had Dr. Angela Davis as our keynote speaker, and we raised over $250,000. Some of that went to charity, but we weren't just going to be Black people that were just giving money away. We wanted to pay all the Black folks that were speaking and performing. We wanted to pay everyone very well, and we were able to do that. And that was our goal. You know, this wasn't just giving money to charity. There are lots of organizations that are doing great work. We're not a charity organization. We are an organization, to what you said, providing enrichment to other people who want to hear our stories.
Absolutely.
And they will give their dollar and we will give them an experience. And that's what we did.
Right.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Bob, the drag queen, because I love that show, you know, We Are Here, because of the ways in which it opens up the whole notion of who drag is for. I mean, it's a profoundly humanizing, very well done show from my vantage point. I'm open to being wrong, but that's my reading of it.
No, you're so right. I mean, I think the Emmy nominations prove that. And the fact that it just got picked up for a second season definitely proves that. I'm so proud of Bob and Shangela and Eureka, the queens that are on the show. And it really does show. And it's so funny watching the show, the drag, I mean, yes, the underlying piece is that drag is for everyone. But then drag is like the least consequential part of that show.
Exactly.
You know?
It sort of brings you in, and then they're like, okay, enough. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
Right. But that really, again, and I know we're being repetitive, but I think it's so important for our listeners to really to sink in and to dig into this point, which is that, you know, when you really get to manage and see where people are honestly, and you explore that from a good place, the connections that get made are much deeper than the thing you thought you were going to see, or the thing you thought you were trying to transcend, right? You know, and that's what you learn from that. That's what you learn from the story you were telling about, you know, integration and, you know, worries about it before you even have a chance, so on. And what you were saying about your partner who was, you know, so able to transcend some of those boundaries. So it's a very important piece of the puzzle. Before you go, I want you to just tell us about your organization, if it has a website. The both, I think there were two you mentioned. So why don't you share that, because I want to make sure people go and find you and put you in their network.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the easiest way for people to find me is on my social media, all platforms, Peppermint 247, like 24/7. And people, I would be remiss if I didn't give a direct plug to my new album that I just talked about that was inspired by basically my personal diary set to music. It's called A Girl Like Me, Letters to My Lovers. Really quickly, it's basically that relationship that I was speaking about. It lasted about a year. It ended, spoiler alert, but I'm very grateful for it. And so I wrote 15, 16 songs. It spreads over 3 EPs, which is the beginning and the middle and the end of the relationship. The first one just came out, Girl Like Me, Letters to My Lovers. The other 2 will come out later on next year. It's available now for streaming. People should check it out, please. It's my heart on I would say on a tape or a record. It is actually available on vinyl, but it's on my heart on an MP3. And so people should check that out. And then in addition, if you want that enrichment, please, or more enrichment, then you should check out, go to blackqueertownhall.org. We have events pretty much quarterly. We do events. The next one is coming up in the new year. It's a STEM science event with a conference, partnering with some folks out of Philadelphia. We're just in the planning stages of that, but it looks to be very promising. We did another event in Minneapolis which is, of course, the city that George Floyd is from. And then our inaugural event, which was during Pride in June. And so that we're going to repeat that again. That'll be annual, but people can get more information and follow Black Queer Town Hall on all social medias and the website.
Fantastic.
And let me just
That was a
add,
mouthful.
let me just add that wonderful YouTube of you in the studio in the making of the album, which is just magnificent. The ways in which you moving back and forth with the folk working with you, your reflections, your laughter, your artistic expression, and so forth. We would recommend that as well. And we just hope that you continue to bear witness to your truth, your love, your justice, because it's connected to our truth, our love, our justice. And 10 years from now, where do you see yourself, you think?
I don't know, some people are like, girl, you better run for office. I don't know. I think I'll wait to see what happens. I'm going to put my energy towards those, the Georgia runoff election that's happening in the beginning of the year.
Oh yeah.
10 years from now, I hope to be just happy.
Yes.
As I am now. I hope to continue to be as happy as I am.
No,
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Because we need that spirit. Well, Peppermint, it's such a joy to have you. You know, you are welcome on the tightrope anytime you want to climb up on this crazy little space. And you know, we'd love to hear when the next album comes out. Let us know. And best of luck. I'm so glad you got a chance to share the blackqueertownhall.org, Peppermint 247. I'm more like Tricia, 8 hours. Because I don't have 24/7. I'm maybe 8.
Closed.
I have to change mine to 8, but anyway, Peppermint 247. It was fantastic to meet you, and keep on keeping on the, you know, on the right side of justice where you are. Thank you so much. So it's time to open our doors, Professor West, to our office hours. And we got this week, we're going to start with an email that I received from a Mr. Gene Burke. In the midst of this whole lot of firsts this week, you know, this idea that there's a first person going to be the first female vice president, so on, first Black vice president. And so we're going to tackle Gene's question as one of the main pieces of our office hours. Okay, so I'm going to read it. You ready, Doc?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right, you ready? You're always ready. I know that. Okay.
Ever ready. Ever ready.
All right. Okay, so Gene wrote and said, last week, you, meaning me, and Dr. West dealt with the issues of Black voting for Democrats and Biden as the lesser of two evils without getting much in return. But Blacks were instrumental in defeating Bernie Sanders, who, if he had been elected, would have given Black people much more than Biden, whom they did vote for. How can this play it safe mentality in the Black community be changed? Or were the Black people who voted for Biden in the primaries, were they wise because Biden had a better chance of beating Trump? Thanks for the great show. In a special extra shout out to you is Dr. West. How would you answer Gene Burke on this question versus Bernie and Biden? So we want to, I guess everybody wants to hear from you on this question first, which me too, actually. So,
well, it's a wonderful question. I mean, it's the second part of it is hypothetical because we're wondering what would have been the case if so-and-so had happened. You see, now in retrospect, we say, okay, Biden did in fact win.
Right.
It was unclear to me whether he had what it takes to really beat Trump because I didn't see enough excitement and enthusiasm among his followers to push him over. Now, of course, we spent a whole lot of time trying to push Biden over. We make videos and speeches and writing tons of letters, op-eds and so forth, but still trying to tell the truth about Biden. So I think there's a truth in both parts of her question. The latter one about whether in fact folk were wise because Biden could beat Trump, that turned out to be true. It was very important make sure Trump is pushed out of the White House. There's no doubt about that. That was a bottom line. That was a fundamental objective. And it looks like we've been able to achieve it if we can push back these last attempts to undermine the election. But the first section of the question about Black folk not voting for Bernie Sanders, you see, a lot of that has to do with the milquetoast Black neoliberal leadership that is too often tied, not just to the Democratic Party's establishment, but it's tied to Wall Street, it's tied to big pharmaceutical companies, it's tied to big insurance companies, it's tied to Pentagon militarism. So you end up with these Black neoliberal leaders who are not giving a priority to Black poor people and Black working people, but rather a priority to either their donors, the people who they get money from, or the folk who are very much in their circles.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we can't ever forget our Black poor and working people. You can't ever forget our Black vulnerable folk, the precious trans and the gays and lesbians and others. Now, this is true for whites and browns and indigenous peoples and Asians as well, because we have a moral and spiritual standard of excellence in our movement. But we begin on the chocolate side of town. And that Black neoliberal leadership that too often gets paid off, they need to be held accountable.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, that makes sense though.
Yeah, that makes very, very good sense. I mean, I'm in accord with what you're saying. And I guess where I would drill down, and then I would ask you this question: what do we do with the fact that if Black people had thrown their votes behind behind Bernie, would that have created a context where I mean, could Bernie beat Trump is a legit question.
That's
because what happens to all the milquetoast, neoliberal whites, right? Because they don't feel safe, and they're a very big constituency, both as voting and as political leaders. And is it a risk Black people should take, right? What are the consequences of different risks here?
Absolutely. And I had some magnificent conversations with brothers and sisters in barbershops and beauty salons and churches in South Carolina with Sister Nina Turner and others. And they would give us powerful arguments against what we were doing. We would listen closely. If they gave the argument that, well, we think maybe Bernie can't beat Trump. And we said, well, we think he can, but we weren't sure. We're not going to lie to the people. We didn't know, but we thought he could because he could generate enthusiasm. But if they believed a lot of the lies of Biden's cheerleaders, because he had cheerleaders running around South Carolina talking about he's been fighting for the downtrodden all his life. Quit lying.
Yeah.
He's the architect of the mass incarceration system. That's a crime against humanity. He was the cheerleader of the invasion and occupation of Iraq. That's a crime against humanity. He unleashed Wall Street greed, crushing poor people and working people. Those are crimes against humanity. You see?
Yeah. And then don't forget figuring out how to collaborate with Strom Thurmond.
Well, that was part of the mass incarceration. See, he's working with the promoters of the old Jim Crow to help institutionalize a new Jim Crow.
Yep.
Now you see, we supposed to forget about that,
right?
Wait a minute.
But again, you got to put it in the context of, what we're up against with Trump, right? And to me, when you said, we didn't know if Biden could win, and many of us wrote op-ed pieces to push him across the line. Look, I mean, in some ways, Trump was so insane that he kind of beat himself amongst a certain constituency. Right. I mean, I think people came out as much for Biden as they did just to say, I can't deal with this maniac anymore.
It's true.
I mean, it's almost like, the other side is helping you win just by being so extreme. And that, by the way, although this isn't Jean's question, I'm more worried about a refined, sophisticated, elite expression of Trump in the future.
Absolutely.
Because once people know that this is possible, they're going to have an elegant, of the likes of whatever would be today's version of a William Buckley, right? An esteemed, intelligent, equally politically dangerous person. So for
That's
me, the worry is
exactly
more
right.
about that than anything else, honestly.
That's so true. And you think, that with the pandemic, depression-like levels of economic impoverishment, unemployment, underemployment, and then with the neo-fascist gangster in the White House, he still gets almost 60% of white brothers' votes, 55% of the white sisters' votes, 30% of the Asian vote, 31% of the Latino vote, 30% of the Jewish vote. He got 28% of the queer vote. He only got 14% last time. He got 28%. You say,
yeah, what was the upside of that? Yeah, I'd love, yeah.
Exactly. But then look at the Black brothers, 19%.
Yeah, well, we got to, you know what, we need a show about that, Doc.
Oh, you ain't lying.
I'm, when I heard it was, when I thought it was 8%, I was mad. But now, that's
80% of the Black brothers that we voted for Biden and 19% went with Trump. You thinking like, dang, come on.
That's
what
for
is
every
going
5.
on?
That means for every 5 brothers, one of them voted for Trump.
One, exactly.
Is that right?
For the courageous, brilliant Black sisters, about 92% voted for Biden. Of 93%, only 7% voted for Trump.
Yeah,
So your point about another Trump coming along, who's not as narcissistic, who's not as gangster-like as Donald Trump is himself. Whew, America would go fascist like that.
Yep, right. Before we even get to the poll, we're gonna look up and find him on the TV.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's
so
like a Boris Johnson in Britain or Nathan Netanyahu in Israel. These very polished gangsters.
Yep.
See, Trump is not polished. He's a gangster, but he's not polished.
Yeah. No. And he's very explicitly trading on racial, tropes and xenophobia. So there's going to become a time when it's not moving back to a dog whistle, but not being so bullish. And when whoever can thread that middle ground between those two, I think is going to be a formidable option.
That's
so
true.
For me, the answer to this office hours problem is that the question of choices is complicated by this arrangement of investments that do not comport with what we expect them to comport with, right? I mean, just from the voting scenarios you're talking about.
That's right.
So, it's hard to say that that there's, an easy best choice that Black people should be voting. We know we need to vote, and we were all still holding on by a thread. But I just think it's not that straightforward, about what the options really are.
That's why in the end, the fundamental answer is very much what we were talking about with our dear sister Peppermint, that we've got to be true to ourselves to hold up the highest moral and spiritual values with memories of our grandmothers and those who loved us and shaped us. And then to be in solidarity with other folks who are also concerned with having integrity, honesty, decency, so that when we have social motion and momentum and movement, it's a formidable one, not just in terms of numbers and quantity, but in terms of quality.
Yes, indeed. And on that note, I believe office hours are going to come to a close just for right now. We have them all the time. And we're just grateful for your questions. Thank you for those of you, write to the Tightrope and send more questions, join Patreon and ask questions there. We love being in conversation. I love being in conversation with Cornel, and we love being in conversation with you. So thank you all very much for joining us on the Tightrope. Thank you, Peppermint, for gracing us with your gifts and spirit today. And thank you, Dr. West, for being a fantastic partner in crime. Have every good evening, and thanks for joining us on the Tightrope.